I'll never forget the way the morning silence was shattered when I heard a pounding on my front door, sharp and insistent like an alarm bell. And when I opened it, there stood Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, with her arms crossed, lips pursed, and a glare that could curdle milk, barking, "You're violating the rules with all those animals in your barn, and I've already reported you." And I could see her eyes darting past me toward the pasture where my horses shifted nervously. The goats rustled in the straw, and the faint sound of owls from their enclosure echoed faintly in the crisp air. And though my first instinct was to slam the door in her face, I forced myself to step outside, boots crunching against the gravel, the smell of hay still on my hands from morning chores, and asked calmly, "And what exactly do you think you've reported?" To which she thrust a flimsy stack of papers in my chest, shouting about unauthorized livestock, exotic creatures, and dangerous species, as though my quiet barnyard was some kind of illicit zoo, and I could feel my pulse quickening with both anger and amusement, because little did she know that I was not only legally permitted to keep every creature under my care, but that I was, in fact, a certified wildlife officer on active duty, trained and licensed to rehabilitate and protect these animals under state and federal law. And as she rambled on about bylaws and neighborhood appearances, the sun rose higher, pouring golden light over the red barn and white fencing, and a hawk I'd rescued months ago cried from the loft, its wings spread wide as if punctuating the absurdity of her accusations. Yet she kept talking, voice shrill, neighbors beginning to gather at the edge of their driveways, whispers floating through the cool morning air. Karen's at it again, and I let her words wash over me until finally, with deliberate calm, I stepped closer and said, "Karen, you've made a serious mistake today." And she snapped back, "The only mistake is you thinking you can keep a farm in this community." And I slowly pulled out my worn leather badge case, flipping it open so that the sunlight struck the polished insignia, the gold eagle and shield glimmering as I announced, "I'm not just your neighbor, I'm a wildlife officer, and every animal in that barn is here under my authority, protected by the very laws you think you understand." And the shift in her face was immediate, her mouth gaping like a fish, papers fluttering from her hand to the gravel, her cheeks flushing crimson as the toe of my words hit her harder than any raised voice could, the crowd of neighbors gasping, one even chuckling. She picked the wrong target this time. And Karen sputtered about overreach and abuse of power, but the cracks in her confidence were widening, her voice trembling, while I explained calmly for everyone to hear that the goats were registered for agricultural exemption. The horses were permitted under county guidelines, and the owls were part of an official rehabilitation program with state wildlife services. And as I spoke, the animals themselves seemed to back me up, the horses stamping their hooves, the goats bleating cheerfully, the hawk letting out a piercing cry that silenced the last of her interruptions. And I added, "What you've done here today, filing false reports and attempting to intimidate me, isn't just petty harassment, it's a violation of law, and if I chose, I could charge you." And she froze, realization dawning that her crusade had backfired spectacularly. And just then a county truck pulled up, one of my colleagues stepping out in uniform with paperwork in hand, greeting me with a nod and asking, "Everything all right, officer?" And I couldn't help but smile as Karen's jaw nearly hit the ground, her head swiveling between us, trying to comprehend how her self-righteous campaign had turned into a public humiliation. The officer confirming aloud for everyone, "All permits are valid, all animals authorized, no violations here." And neighbors who had suffered under her nitpicking finally exhaled, one whispering, "About time she got put in her place." And the weight of the moment settled in as Karen stumbled backward, gathering her papers from the gravel, muttering excuses about misunderstandings, before retreating red-faced to her house. And as the crowd dispersed, relief and even quiet applause spreading through them, I turned back toward my barn, the animals waiting patiently, the warm smell of hay and wood filling the air. And I thought back to that first pounding knock, the arrogance in her voice, and I felt the deep satisfaction of justice, not through shouting or retaliation, but by revealing the truth and standing firm. And as I closed the barn doors behind me, the hawk settling back on its perch, I realized that sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is not with anger, but with authority. And that day, Karen, from the HOA, learned that the barn she hated so much was not a violation, but a sanctuary, protected by law, cared for with duty, and backed by an officer who would never let her or anyone else strip away the rights that shield both people and animals. And as the late morning sun spilled across the field, I knew the story would echo through the neighborhood for years. The day Karen tried to report the barn, only to discover the neighbor she despised was the very wildlife officer who wrote the rules she could never bend.